The train hissed to a stop in Dust Creek, sending steam curling into the dry morning air. Lydia clutched her small carpet bag to her chest and took one deep breath before stepping onto the wooden platform. Her boots felt too loud. Her dress, well-worn and homemade, clung awkwardly in the breeze. She didn't expect flowers, didn't expect a kiss. But she hadn't expected laughter either. A group of townsfolk gathered near the depot, eyes squinting at her. Near the back of the crowd stood a lanky man in a stiff brown suit, her betrothed, Samuel Greaves. His eyes narrowed when he saw her, and the smile he'd practiced in letters vanished into a sneer. "You?" he scoffed. "You're Lydia Mercer?" She swallowed and nodded. "I am." He turned his back. "She didn't mention the size in the letters," he muttered to no one and everyone at once. A few chuckled. Someone whispered, "Maybe she ate the last bride on the train." Lydia's hands trembled around the bag. Her cheeks burned. She had expected disappointment, not cruelty, not this. She didn't beg, didn't speak, just stood there as Samuel mounted his wagon and rode off without a glance. The crowd lingered, waiting for more humiliation. That's when the stranger moved. He'd been leaning against a post, silent, hat low, arms crossed. A rancher, clearly. Broad-shouldered, dust on his boots, and eyes that had seen too much to flinch now. He walked forward slowly. The crowd quieted. Lydia looked up, startled. The man said nothing. He just held out a hand. "I don't," she stammered. "I'm not what you're looking for." He didn't flinch, just stepped beside her, took the bag gently, and with one smooth motion lifted her onto his horse like she weighed nothing at all. Gasps rippled through the platform. Lydia sat there frozen, higher than she'd ever felt in her life, with all those eyes now watching not a joke, but a declaration. The cowboy mounted behind her, reins loose in his hand. "Name's Callum," he said softly. "You'll ride with me now." Lydia's throat tightened. She glanced once at the place where Samuel had stood, then leaned slightly into the warmth behind her. She didn't understand what had just happened, but for the first time since the train left Missouri, she didn't feel ashamed. Just quiet. And seen. As the horse stepped off the platform and onto the road, Lydia whispered to the wind, "I know I'm not pretty." Callum's voice behind her was calm as stone. Maybe not to them, but they never looked right. Lydia sat stiffly in front of Callum as they rode away from the station, unsure where to place her hands or thoughts. The horse's steady gait lulled her toward a strange calm, and the silence between them, though thick, wasn't cruel like what she'd just escaped. She peeked once over her shoulder, but Callum's face remained unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. He didn't speak for the first mile, not even to ask her name. When he finally did, his voice was low, like thunder held in check. "You got family?" Lydia shook her head. "They were glad to be rid of me." She regretted the words the moment they left her lips, but Callum didn't flinch or offer pity, just nodded once and said, "I don't talk much, but I listen good." They passed fields of frost-covered earth, lonely fencing posts, and the occasional raven perched like a warning. Lydia watched it all in silence. She was used to silence, but not this kind. This one had warmth in it, somehow. At last, they came upon a small homestead tucked between hills and brush. A modest barn, a house with a slanted porch, and smoke curling from the chimney. He dismounted and offered her a hand again. "This is your place?" she asked softly. "It is now," he replied. Lydia blinked. "You mean I'm staying?" He looked at her as if the question itself made no sense. "I didn't lift you onto that horse just to leave you on the road." Inside, The cabin smelled of wood smoke and sage. Callum lit a lantern, hung her coat, and gestured toward a chair by the fire. Lydia eased into it like it might vanish beneath her. He ladled stew from a pot and placed it in front of her, along with thick slices of bread. "You didn't have to," she began. "Eat," he said, not unkindly. She did. Slowly. Watching him move about the space, everything he did was quiet, deliberate. No wasted motion, no raised voice. It unnerved her and soothed her in equal measure. When she finally looked up from the bowl, she asked, "Why'd you do it?" "Do what?" "Step in." He looked at her then. Really looked. "'Cause what they did to you wasn't decent, and someone needed to remind them what decent looks like." Lydia pressed her lips together to keep them from trembling. In all her 25 years, no one had ever spoken for her, let alone done so with action, not noise. That night she cried in a bed too soft for someone used to floors, not because she was scared, but because, for the first time, she wasn't. The morning broke crisp and pale. Lydia woke to the creak of floorboards and the aroma of black coffee already brewing. She sat up slowly, unsure whether last night had been a mercy or a dream. The quilt around her was hand-stitched, the pillow fluffed, the room clean but humble, like its owner. When she stepped into the main room, Callum was pouring coffee into a tin cup. He handed it to her without a word and returned to the stove, where cornbread sizzled in a cast-iron pan. Lydia stood awkwardly until he gestured to the table. "Stayin' means eatin'," he said, "and eatin' means helpin' when you're ready." She nodded. "I'm used to work." He didn't smile, but the line of his jaw eased. After breakfast, he showed her the barn. 3 horses, a mule, and a few half-repaired fence rails that needed mending. "Do what you're comfortable with," he said. "I don't run folks ragged." She looked around and felt something strange. Potential. As if the world wasn't closing in, but opening up. That afternoon, while sweeping the porch, Lydia noticed a wooden chest tucked behind a faded rocker. Curious, she lifted the lid and gasped. Inside lay a dress. Pale blue, finely stitched, clearly never worn. Wrapped in tissue like it was sacred. She ran her fingers over the fabric, marveling at its softness. She couldn't help herself. She held it to her body and stepped inside, closing the door behind her. When she came out, hours later, dust glowed gold across the porch, and Callum stood with a bridle in one hand, frozen mid-step. She flushed. "I'm sorry. I found it by accident. I didn't mean—" "It was meant for someone," he said, voice slower than usual. "But she didn't stay." "Was she your wife?" Lydia asked quietly. "Almost." He stared past her, eyes unreadable. She couldn't handle the quiet. Lydia looked down. "I don't want to take anything that isn't mine." "Then don't," he said. "Just keep it. If it fits, it's yours." Lydia blinked. "Why would you give me something that special?" Callum met her gaze for the first time in hours. "Because you didn't come here asking for anything, but somehow you gave me back something I'd buried a long time ago." Lydia didn't know what to say, so she just nodded and went back inside. But later that night, when she hung the dress on the wall beside her bed, she did something she hadn't done in years. She smiled. 2 days later, Lydia rode into town beside Callum. The blue dress he'd given her fluttered lightly around her boots, and though her hair was pinned simply, she walked straighter. The townsfolk turned to look, their faces painted with curiosity, confusion, and for some, embarrassment. Lydia knew exactly what they were seeing. The woman who had been mocked at the train station now sitting tall beside a man Dust Creek respected but barely understood. Callum tied off the horse outside the general store, then offered her his hand to dismount. She hesitated. Not because she feared falling, but because of what it meant to take it. Still she did. Inside, she busied herself with supplies, keeping her eyes down until a voice sneered behind her. "Well, look what Callum dragged in." It was Samuel, the same man who had humiliated her. "That dress come with pity or interest?" Lydia froze, but before she could answer, Callum appeared behind her like a shadow solidifying. "She came with more grace than you ever had, Samuel." The store grew silent. Samuel's face reddened. "So this is what you're doing now? Picking up the scraps the rest of us pass on?" Callum didn't raise his voice. "Some of us know value when we see it." The insult struck deep, and Samuel's hand hovered near his hip. The room stiffened. Lydia stepped forward before it escalated. "You had your chance to be decent," she said clearly, loud enough for every shelf and eye in the room. "You chose cruelty. I'm not the one who should be ashamed." The silence that followed was sharp. Then a soft, nervous clap came from behind the flour sacks. An old woman who ran the post office. Another joined, then another. Samuel cursed under his breath and stormed out. Outside, the wind picked up. Callum turned to Lydia, his voice quiet again. "You didn't need me just now. That was all you." She exhaled shakily. "I've never spoken back like that in my life." "Then you just earned something new," he said. "Pride." As they walked back to the horse, Callum reached to help her up, but this time she didn't hesitate. She took his hand, met his eyes, and let him lift her again, but not like some burden, like a woman of worth. A few feet away, a little girl in braids whispered to her mother, "Is she a princess?" Her mother whispered back, "No." "She's something rarer. She's brave." Lydia rode back out of town, wearing more than just a dress. She wore proof that dignity, once claimed, is hard to take back. That evening, the wind howled through the hills like it carried stories too old to speak aloud. Callum stacked firewood against the cabin while Lydia fed the chickens, her apron pockets dusted with feed. It was the kind of simple rhythm she'd never known, honest, unhurried, and strangely healing. At supper, they ate stew and cornbread in companionable silence. Lydia had stopped asking why he was kind. She was beginning to believe some men simply were. After the dishes were done, she stood near the hearth, her fingers resting on the edge of the mantel. "Callum," she said gently, "where do you sleep?" He looked up from where he was oiling his saddle. "Barn's good enough." "But the bed was meant for a guest. You needed it." Lydia swallowed. "You gave up your space, just like that?" He didn't answer, just went back to his work like the matter was too obvious to warrant words. Something in her chest tightened. All her life she'd been traded, scolded, ignored, but never honored. Not like this. She walked toward him slowly, the blue dress trailing softly over the floorboards. "Why?" she asked. "Why me?" He looked up, saddle rag in hand, and spoke without ceremony. "Because I know what it feels like to be looked at wrong, judged without cause, and because I never saw you as less." The fire popped in the hearth. Lydia blinked quickly and turned away, pretending to adjust the lamp. "You have a room, don't you?" she asked. "Off the barn?" "I do. Is it warm?" "It's fine." She looked at him, really looked. "Then let me fix it up for you. You've done enough." Callum studied her a long moment. "All right." That night, while he sat whittling on the porch, Lydia carried out a quilt, a lantern, and a tin of dried lavender she'd found tucked behind the flour sacks. She swept the barn room, fluffed the bedding, and laid the lavender on the pillow. It wasn't much, but it was something made from her own will. When she finished, she stepped outside. Callum rose to his feet, and for a long second, they just looked at each other beneath the star-pricked sky. "It's ready," she said softly. "You're sure? I want you to rest, too." He nodded but didn't move. "You're changing things, Lydia. Not just in here?" He gestured to the cabin. "Out here, too." She smiled faintly. "Maybe quiet people just need quiet places to matter." He held her gaze a heartbeat longer, then tipped his hat. "Good night, Lydia." "Good night, Callum." When the door closed behind him, she leaned against it, exhaling into the warm silence. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was beginning to belong. Sunday brought sunlight and stillness, the kind that made even the wind tiptoe across the grass. Lydia rose early and swept the cabin floor with care. She braided her hair, wore the blue dress again, and set biscuits to bake before Callum returned from the creek with 2 fresh trout. They were halfway through breakfast when a knock rattled the door. Callum stiffened. "Stay here," he muttered, rising slow. Lydia peeked past him as he opened the door, and instantly recognized the man standing outside. Reverend Henry Tate. A thin smile, sharp eyes, and a Bible tucked under his arm like a shield. He'd presided over Samuel's family since the beginning of Dust Creek. "Callum," the Reverend greeted, voice honeyed. "I heard you took in a guest." Callum said nothing. Lydia stepped forward despite the chill creeping up her spine. "Morning, Reverend." His smile tightened. "Miss Mercer, isn't it? We were all so surprised by your arrival. A shame about how things played out with young Samuel." "A shame," Lydia echoed flatly. "Indeed. A man's reputation can suffer when a woman's presence invites gossip. You understand?" Callum's jaw flexed. "There's no gossip if no one spreads it. I'm simply here to offer guidance. Miss Mercer may wish to return to town and start anew, perhaps a job with the parish. And I'm sure Samuel would reconsider, if you handled yourself more agreeably." Lydia's breath caught. The nerve of it. But before she could speak, Callum stepped forward. "She's not going anywhere." "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me. She's under my roof and under my protection. And I'll thank you to keep your preaching in church where it belongs." The Reverend's face paled, lips twitching. "This arrangement isn't proper, Callum. Folks are talking." "Then let them. She's done more for this ranch in a week than most folks have done for each other in a lifetime." Lydia placed a hand on Callum's arm, steadying him. "Thank you, Reverend," she said politely. "But I'm not seeking Samuel's reconsideration or the town's approval. I'm not lost. I'm just finally found." The Reverend cleared his throat, straightened his Bible, and stepped back. "Then may God judge what men cannot." "He already does," Lydia replied softly. Callum shut the door with finality. They stood in the silence after, neither speaking. Then Lydia whispered, "Did I go too far?" "Not far enough," Callum said, "but we'll get there." She smiled, small but sure. Out the window, the Reverend rode off, smaller than when he'd come, and behind him, Dust Creek stood still, watching, waiting. Lydia wasn't afraid. Let them watch. By midweek, Lydia had slipped into the rhythm of ranch life like she'd been born to it. She could milk a goat without flinching, stack wood without complaint, and cook supper so well Callum didn't even try to hide his surprise anymore. But just as the days settled into something warm and bearable, a shadow returned. It came not as a storm or knock at the door, but as a saddle slung over the barn rail that neither of them owned. Lydia spotted it first. Worn leather, new cinch rope, no dust, no markings. She stepped back slowly and called out, "Callum?" He came quickly, eyes narrowing when he saw it. "That yours?" she asked, though she already knew. "No," he said. His tone dropped lower than usual. "Stay inside." Lydia obeyed, but watched from the cabin window. Callum walked the perimeter of the barn, boots deliberate, revolver now at his hip. Minutes passed. Then nothing. No rider. No horse. Just that saddle. Left like a threat. When he returned, Lydia met him at the door. "What is it?" "Warning," he said. "From someone who wants me to know they've been here." "Samuel?" she whispered. "Could be. Or someone who thinks I stole something." "Me," she said. "They think you stole me." Callum didn't deny it. That night, he slept in a chair by the front door, shotgun across his lap. Lydia sat awake too, mending a rip in his shirt with trembling hands. She'd never felt safer, and yet more vulnerable. At dawn, she brought him coffee and sat beside him on the porch. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Bringing me here?" He shook his head slowly. "You didn't come to break anything. You came to put things back together. But I didn't ask you for help. Doesn't mean you didn't deserve it." She looked out at the frost-covered field. "Maybe I should leave. Make it easier." "Easier for who?" he asked. "Not me. You barely knew me when you lifted me onto that horse." "Didn't need to. I saw the way they looked at you, like you were something broken, but you looked back like you still had fire." Lydia smiled faintly. "I wasn't sure I did." "You do now." That morning, she watched him bury the mystery saddle behind the barn. Not in fear, but in defiance. Whoever left it thought they were sending a message. But Callum had already answered it, with kindness, with quiet strength, with a woman in a blue dress who refused to shrink. And by nightfall, Lydia wrote something in her journal for the first time in years. Not everything that starts in pain stays there. The wind smelled of smoke before either of them saw it. Just after dusk, with the lamps glowing low and Lydia humming as she shelled peas, Callum stepped outside and froze. "Lydia," he called, voice sharp. She came running. In the distance, near the edge of the tree line, a flickering orange pulse licked the sky. Fire. "Barn's too dry," he muttered. "If that spreads—" Lydia's breath hitched. "You think it's an accident?" Callum looked at her, jaw tight. "I think whoever left that saddle just stopped whispering." They moved fast. Callum saddled his horse, rifle slung tight, while Lydia ran to the creek and filled every bucket she could carry. As flames crept down the hill, shadows moved between trees, figures watching, uncertain, testing. Lydia wanted to scream at them to show their faces, but she knew that's not how cowards worked. They let the fire speak for them. Callum galloped toward the blaze, hacking at underbrush and digging trenches with the shovel tied to his saddle. Lydia doused what she could, her arms soaked, lungs burning. The flames reached the edge of the chicken coop before the wind shifted. A single gust, cool and sudden, pushed the fire back, sending sparks in the opposite direction. Callum whooped once, loud and clear, then waved her toward him. By dawn, the fire had starved itself. The barn stood blackened but intact. Smoke hung like fog. Lydia's hair clung to her face, soot smudging her cheeks. "You all right?" Callum asked, breathless. She nodded, but the tears in her eyes betrayed her. "They were willing to burn everything," she whispered, "just to undo what we've built." Callum stepped closer. "They didn't win." "Not tonight." She looked around. "But what if they come again?" He took her hand, rough palm to soot-streaked fingers. "Then we keep building. They only win if we quit." In the stillness, a horse whinnied from behind the barn. Lydia turned. A familiar old mare, her childhood horse, taken from her years ago, stood tethered beneath a tree. A note pinned to its saddle read only, "This belonged to you before." Still does. Her hand trembled as she reached out. "Samuel?" she whispered. Callum frowned, reading over her shoulder. "Or someone else who knows guilt doesn't die with fire." Lydia pressed her forehead against the mare's neck, tears hot against the soft coat. "Maybe not everyone in Dust Creek wants me gone. Maybe some just needed to see you stand tall first." She looked back at the cabin, singed but standing, like her. That night, she didn't write in her journal. She didn't have to. The sky told the story, blackened but clearing. It was 2 days after the fire when the knock came. Not hard, not loud, but purposeful. Callum opened the door slowly, rifle in reach. Lydia stood behind him, heart racing. And there he was, Samuel Graves, clean-shaven, suit dusty from the ride. One hand cradled against his chest in a makeshift sling. His pride wasn't the only thing broken. "I came to say I was wrong," Samuel said, not meeting Lydia's eyes. "And not just about you." Callum didn't move. "What do you want?" Samuel cleared his throat. "The night of the fire, it wasn't me. But I knew who lit it. I didn't stop them. I thought if they scared you enough, you'd leave quietly." Lydia stepped forward, voice steady. "So what changed?" "The town did," Samuel said. "Or maybe I started listening better. After the fire, folks talked. Some said you were trouble, others said you were brave. But no one could deny you stayed, and rebuilt, and fought back without swinging." He looked up, finally. "I thought you were beneath me, but it turns out I was beneath you." Lydia's breath caught, but she said nothing. Let him finish. "The Reverend's been spreading lies. He's afraid of a woman who won't bow, afraid of a man like Callum backing her up. But the rest of us, some of us, are tired of pretending those rules still matter. You didn't just survive what Dust Creek threw at you, Lydia. You rewrote what a woman like you can do here." Callum crossed his arms. "You come to apologize or stir dust?" "Apologize," Samuel said, "and to ask if you'd let me help fix the barn. It ain't much, but it's something." Lydia looked to Callum. He gave the barest shrug. Her choice. Always. She stepped forward, holding Samuel's gaze. "You can help," she said, "but you'll do it without preaching, without gossip, without expecting anything but sweat and silence." Samuel nodded, relieved. "Understood." He turned to leave, pausing only once. "You still wear that blue dress like you're trying not to be seen, Lydia. But just so you know, everyone sees you now." She watched him ride away, the broken wrist resting lightly on the reins, the shame no longer hidden. "That took something," Callum said softly. "It did," Lydia agreed, "but not nearly as much as staying." That night they sat on the porch together in the swing Callum had built that morning. Her head rested on his shoulder. His fingers brushed hers. No words. Just two people who didn't need town approval to feel whole. Just the creak of the swing and the whisper of a new beginning. The first Sunday of spring dawned with soft winds and sunlight that warmed the earth just enough to coax green from brown. Lydia woke early, brushed out her hair, and buttoned the blue dress that had once felt like a curtain of shame. Now it was something else. She stood before the mirror, tied a strip of lace at her waist, and smiled, not at the reflection, but at what it no longer whispered. Outside, Callum had hitched the wagon, his shirt pressed and boots polished, looking every bit the man Dust Creek once ignored. "You sure you want to go?" he asked, tipping his hat. "The church folks—" "Let them see me," Lydia said. "Let them see us." They rode in together, past the spot where the fire had scorched the field. past the townspeople who once turned away from her at the train station. Now they nodded, some polite, others guilty. A few smiled. The Reverend stood at the chapel doors, his mouth tightening when he saw them, but he stepped aside without a word. Inside, Lydia sat beside Callum in the last pew. Heads turned, whispers fluttered, but no one dared speak aloud. When the sermon ended, she rose first, walked down the center aisle, her spine straight, her chin lifted, and Callum followed without hesitation. Outside, Samuel approached with a hammer tucked in his belt. "After lunch, I'll start on the barn." "Good," Lydia said. "I'll make lemonade." He nodded, then stepped back into the crowd. Callum took her hand. "What are you thinking?" "That I was wrong," Lydia whispered. "About what?" "I thought no one would want me. That being plain made me invisible. That shame was something you wore like skin. But I was wrong." "You were never plain," he said. "They just couldn't see past their own pride." "And you?" "I saw you from the first moment," he said. "When you stood there alone in that blue dress like it didn't matter if no one came." She blinked back tears. "You made me feel like I was royalty." "That's because you are." That afternoon, they walked back to the ranch. The barn smelled of ash and pine, but it stood solid again. The cabin windows shone. The swing creaked gently in the wind. Lydia placed a fresh jar of wildflowers on the table, pulled out her journal, and wrote her final line. "I came here thinking I was broken. But love doesn't fix you. It reminds you that you were never ruined in the first place." Then she set down the pen, looked at Callum and smiled, like someone who had never once doubted her worth.